Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com. Welcome to the new warehouse. This episode originally broadcast live on LinkedIn featuring Izzy Rosenzweig of Portless. We discuss how Portless is utilizing their international 3PL services to get brands' products delivered faster to over 50 countries. Through direct shipping, they are getting products out of China from customer order to doorstep in an average of 5.2 days. Find out how they are doing that and how it can improve your supply chain on this episode brought to you by Portless. Find more on Portless at portless.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
All right, we are live here. I am Kevin of the New Warehouse Podcast, believer that warehouses are sexy, and I'm being told that I'm also being joined by another believer today, and that's Izzy Rosenzweig of Portless, who's going to talk to us a little bit about Portless, what it is that they do, a little different approach to the 3PL, I think, and from an international perspective. And we're going to dive into the idea of direct shipping out of China and how that works and how American brands can leverage some of those tools to be able to do that. But first, Izzy, how are you today?
Doing great, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me on. And as you said, there's a small amount of people that just love supply chain and warehouses as much as we do, but we have a way of finding each other. So I'm super excited to be here.
Absolutely. And we're thankful that you are a warehouses are sexy believer and that you're joining us today. Very interested to talk about this topic. But why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of your background and then what led to kind of Portless?
Yeah, totally. So I started as a consumer business. I ran a consumer business for 10 years. In the early days of that consumer business, I was doing the typical supply chain. I was manufacturing in China. I would put it on a boat, wait 2 months to get it, pay the import duties, bring it to a local facility, and only then ship it to my customers. So I very much understood the pain point of the more successful we were in selling product, the less cash we had. Because all the cash that we had would go back into the factory, into production, and just sit on a boat. So that was the early days of my commerce business. Mm-hmm. Then early on, I got very fortunate. I met a former CFO of Alibaba. He introduced us to this cross-border logistics model. And then we started doing that for the next 8 years. And fundamentally, what this model is, it really is a entirely different way looking at supply chain for e-commerce businesses. So like I said before, the early days, we would have to wait 2 months. So if I was manufacturing sweaters, I would manufacture 10,000 sweaters. I would put on a boat. I would wait 2 months for that product to get to the U.S., pay the import duties, and only once it got to U.S. facility am I shipping it to my customer, and it took 4 to 7 days. In this model that got really mature over the last 10 years, is an entirely different approach. So if you were done production, let's say it was March 1st, you could move your inventory to our facility in Shenzhen. We'll get it usually on average 2 days post-production. And then we're integrated to any tech stack you think of, at Shopify, whatever it is. And immediately you can start selling it to your customer. And what we're able to do is we're able to pick and pack those orders and deliver it to the end customer in 5.2 days. From a consumer perspective, that means 5.2 days on average post-order. They had a USPS driver drop off a package with the USPS label, fully local experience. That customer could have made 2 transactions on the same day, one from a brand that we service, one from a brand that we don't service, and most likely they'll have the same driver drop off 2 packages on the same day. So from a consumer-facing perspective, they had a very normal local US experience. But from a brand perspective, it's game-changing, and we call the advantages in 3 major buckets. So one is cash flow. So lead time just went from 2 months to 2 days. So you could turn inventory into cash 2 days post-production versus the typical model you're waiting over 2 months. Then you have to ask the question, from an inventory perspective, did I need so much inventory? And maybe I only needed 10,000 sweatshirts at a time because I had to account for 2 months on the water. But when you have your lead time being 2 days, maybe you just need 4,000 units of the sweatshirt. And as you're selling, you're just going back into production and you're restocking literally a box at a time, a pallet at a time, or a truck at a time, whatever works for you. So all of a sudden, your inventory agility is a lot more agile and simple to understand how much inventory you need. Your lead time, inventory to cash, is way better. And the idea of going out of stock during the high seasons should be a thing of the past. So historically, if you were selling a product during Christmas season, let's say it was November 10th, you're sold out from your best black sweatshirt. Well, in our model, go back into production, even if it takes 10 days for production or 15 days for production, you're still selling towards the end of November. So the ability to capture out of stock, simple supply chain, and lead time, that's just one advantage in this model. Let's now move to second advantage, which is helping you make more money. Well, first of all, warehousing overseas is cheaper than locally. Pick and pack overseas is cheaper. There are no container costs because there are no containers in this model. And with Section 321, when you ship a product to the end consumer and the order value is under $800, it's import duty free. So for apparel brands, that could be up to 43% savings. And shipping rates start at $5. And I'll put a caveat there. This is mainly for companies that have lighter products. So if you're in the apparel business, cosmetic business, jewelry business, accessory business, as long as your stuff are on the lighter end, you're going to have great shipping rates, no container costs, no import duties, cheaper warehousing, cheaper pick and pack. So A, we just gave you agility in your inventory. B, we helped you make more money. And the last thing is we do this to 50 countries. So we get delivered to Europe in 4.4 days, all local experience. So you have customers. So if you want to open up new markets, we'll help with every step of it. So A, you don't need to send inventory around the world. You have one little inventory hub with us, which is now servicing 50 countries. So Royal Mail to the UK, Australia Post to Australia. And we just help make that entire transition super easy. You know, in Europe, we help with VAT collection and VAT filing, really making expansion go dead simple. So in summary, you have way better lead times, way better cash flow, and simplicity in your inventory. 2, will help you increase your gross margin by all these savings in this model. And 3, will help net increase your revenue by easily going global.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Very interesting, and obviously, you know, a huge difference in time there, as you mentioned. You know, waiting 2 months for something to come off a ship and being able to get it even just to the point where you can start to really sell it and fulfill orders with that product. You know, it changes dramatically the way you can run your business and the way you can push those sales as well. So, I mean, I guess you come from an e-commerce background there, from an e-commerce brand. So tell us a little bit about maybe how, like, discovering this and leveraging this has kind of changed how you would have historically or traditionally approached the way you ran that brand?
Absolutely. And I like to give one classic example. I
Sure.
give it almost every time. It's the story of Philip Knight and Nike. So he has his book. He's a great book called Shoe Dogs. He talks about his shoes from the get-go was selling amazing. And you would think, oh, Nike's always perfect. And the more they sold, the more successful the company. It was the opposite. The more they sold, the less cash they had. And I think they almost went bankrupt 3 times. And not because demand wasn't great. Demand was incredible. They just didn't have the cash because it always went back into production with these massive wait times. So in the early days, and I would say even many DTC businesses that were growing outside of this model, there's so much capital that's needed. So you're either going to private equity. Back in the day, venture was putting more money towards DTC. But a lot of that money got dried up when interest rates went up. And because if you look at the public markets, a lot of DTC brands don't have great multiples because cash flow is so hard, because margins are so hard. So what we say is we believe that DTC is very bright from 2 aspects. One, you don't need their cash. In this model, you're turning your inventory to cash extremely fast, which means historically you might need, a couple $1,000,000 just to manage your inventory. Well, the need of capital goes away. As long as you're really good at marketing, you can sell your product, you can turn inventory to cash within days and then reinvest that capital. So the idea of needing venture or private equity capital to run your business will become less and less needed in this model because it turns into a washing machine. You're producing product, you're selling it, you're collecting the money right away, you're going back into production. So that cash cycle is incredible. So that's just from how historically brands would need capital versus now they need way less capital. And the second thing is this to me will also will change in the future the way DTC companies go public, because now you could go public and you can have great cash flow business, 20x better than what the previous DTC brands went public, had horrible cash flow or free cash flow. And then gross margins are improving. So demand is there, right? US has hundreds of billions of dollars of direct consumer business. Worldwide, it's way larger than that. So consumers want brands' products. Brands simply need to operate at a different level. They need to operate at more efficiency, better profit margins. But once they operate with this being one example, supply chain, massively improving cash flow and margins, you're going to have really healthy businesses that we built on this supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a great thing to point out, to be able to increase that cash flow overall and just, generate those sales quicker. And I'm curious your thoughts on like for an e-commerce brand that's just starting out or starting up. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges is limited capital, right? And getting kind of that initial product out and, trying to sell it as quickly as possible to keep that cycle going. I mean, do you work with or would you suggest that like brands that are starting out should look at this kind of model?
Great question. So the way we actually don't take like brand new brands, because the first thing a brand actually has to do before you start fixing your supply chain or optimizing, you actually have to figure out distribution. So you first need to produce your product, make sure it's a great product. Then you need to crack the code for yourself of how you're going to sell your product. E-commerce is simply a distribution channel, right? It's a method of selling. You could sell it on marketplaces. You could sell it in your Shopify store. You could sell it in your neighborhood. You could sell it in retail stores. The first thing an entrepreneur has to do is, how am I selling this great idea, this great product I had? I got to figure out how to sell it. If you end up selling it and you end up learning that like, oh, I could sell 100 a day or 50 a day or whatever that number is, then you can start optimizing. In the early days, you need to buy 1,000 units or whatever it is. You just got to figure out how you're selling it. Once you're focused and you understand you have a method that is repeatable of how to sell your product, then you back and say, okay, now I'm going to massively simplify my supply chain, because as I scale, that will massively save my cash flow. Because what I've seen actually interesting enough is in the early days, before you're scaling, companies don't even realize how hard cash flow could be as you scale. Like, okay, I got 10 grand in inventory. I got 50 grand in inventory. Theoretically, that's, it's a lot of money, but relatively as you scale, it's not a lot of money. Once you start becoming successful, now you're selling $1 million a month or 100K a month or $1 million, whatever that number is, the numbers get bigger, which means all of a sudden those large numbers are now moving to produce the product. That's where this matters. When you're going from, In the beginning days, I say control it, bring it in. You got to solve distribution. Once you solve distribution and you layer on the supply chain, then you can scale as aggressive as you want. You'll be in a pretty good cash flow position.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting advice there. And I'm curious. I mean, do you see where when they get to that point of, I guess like sophisticating their supply chain and looking at this type of model and trying to optimize that supply chain overall, as you mentioned there, are you seeing where you guys as Portless are kind of just becoming like the sole 3PL fulfillment provider for these brands, or is it that they have some products that they're still going through traditional route and then kind of differentiating depending on the product line or the SKU that they're dealing with?
Yeah, great question. So I would say for majority, again, we mainly service brands that fit in our model. So it's got to be on the lighter weight side. So it's got to either you're looking at apparel, cosmetics, jewelry, like we don't do furniture, right? So we do end up getting, I would say, all of their DTC business, but sometimes you have brands that also have a wholesale side to the business. This model doesn't work well for wholesale. So what ends up happening is they bring in less inventory than, if they were going to bring in, let's say 100,000 units, 10,000 is wholesale, 90,000 is DTC. So they could reduce their needs of inventory on the DTC side of the business and leverage us for 100% of the DTC side, and then bring in less inventory for the wholesale side of the business for local.
Interesting. Yeah. I was curious about that kind of mix or variation there that could be, and it makes sense that you have kind of that ICP, right, that you can mention there a couple of times, where you have that ideal customer profile, the smaller, lighter items. I mean, where do you kind of maybe draw the line, or if you're working with somebody, engaging with a customer where you would say that like, this is not really like a good fit for this kind of model?
Yeah, we say like the best are under 5 pounds. So if your order's under 5 pounds, you're going to gain value in massive improvements to cash flow. You're going to gain value in gross margin areas, and you'll gain value in going global. However, every once in a while, we have a company that has a high AOV, so it might be like $500 or $300 of a product. Even though it's bulkier, they might save money on warehousing, they might save money on Section 321, and they might even end up paying us a little more in shipping, even though it's because it's bulky. But to them, cash flow is everything. So more businesses go bankrupt out of bad cash flow than it does out of gross margin. So we do see many businesses, again, it's not our ICP, but we do see businesses that even though it's bulky and above 5 pounds, they'll still leverage us to just maximize cash flow efficiency.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think it's a great thing, like you guys are able to figure this out and how to leverage this for these brands to be able to get that product to the market quicker and like you said, increase those margins potentially and also reduce that cash flow cycle, which I think is such a key, as you've mentioned in here. And I also think it's interesting that you're able to, not only just get to the States in, like 5.2 days, like you said, but internationally too as well. So do you see where, brands are maybe building up within the States, for example, and they've built up their brand and now they're ready to do some type of international expansion and maybe try selling in a different country or multiple other countries? I mean, are they coming to you as a potential like bridge or solution to be able to do that a little easier? Absolutely.
So what we usually do is we usually start with people's core markets. We help them maximize efficiencies there. And once we're with them, to expand globally is extremely simple. So they may open up UK first, and all of a sudden, they go to if they're on Shopify, you just simply turn on markets. And then for us, it's either printing a Royal Mail or USPS. So we definitely help customers access other markets very simply. And for US brands, going into Europe, cost of marketing is much cheaper. And for European brands, being able to sell into US gets a lot simpler with us versus like moving on a boat and finding a 3PL. So absolutely, helping customers go global is part of what we do.
Great. Yeah. And I think it's great that you're able to do that same kind of service level for multiple different countries, and being able to leverage that from one point, I think is really a huge win for brands potentially to be able to do that, to have that kind of expansion. And now you mentioned Section 321, 321 a couple times in there. So maybe for listeners who are not familiar with that, why don't you kind of give us just a little overview of what that is?
Yeah, Section 321 has been around for a very long time. It basically says if a package that is under $800 value is going directly to consumer, it comes to the consumer import duty free. So brands have actually been leveraging this for years out of Mexico, out of Canada, but fundamentally works from anywhere. If you're sending a package to an end consumer and the value of goods is under $800, it is import duty free. So for us, what's different than the Mexico model, the Canadian model is not only do you get import duties, but you also get massive advantages in your cash flow. But that's fundamentally what it is. If the package is going to the consumer and it's under $800 value, it is import duty free. No tariffs, no import duties, right to the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's been, I mean, that's kind of like as we look at like a Temu or a Shein, however you say it, that's kind of like how they're able to leverage that a little bit. But there's a lot of kind of discussion around that. What happens if that goes away? You know, if that goes away, how does that, or how do you see that kind of maybe impacting that type of market? Does it really impact it at all? What are your thoughts there?
Great question. So I'll tackle two parts. So first is there's always the talk of like, oh, it's not fair. The Chinese companies are using Section 321, but we can't. First of all, that is absolutely incorrect. We only work with US brands Western brands. We work with brands in Europe as well. But we help tons of US brands use Section 321. And what happens? They make more money. They could take that money. They're hiring more. They're doing partnerships. The consumers are getting better prices. So fundamentally, anyone can leverage Section 321. And we're empowering, because it's complex, we're empowering the US brands to leverage this model as well. So that's, first of all, it is not only for Chinese companies, it is for any brand, including US brands, can leverage. Then it's if this goes away. So there is talk it may go away. I mean, it's been tried a few times. It hasn't gone anywhere. Even if it went away tomorrow, two aspects. One is, well, the brands that we service were paying import tax yesterday. So end of the day, you still have the massive advantages of lead time, agility in inventory, and out of stock ability, and going global. So even if Section 321 disappeared, from fundamentally, cash flow for brands is the number one thing that will stop them from scaling or put them in tough positions, and that's what we solve. And today we also solve Section 321.
Interesting. So I mean, I guess it sounds like if it goes away, then I mean, there's no real impact in a sense to, you know, being able to deliver efficiently as you guys are doing, and also that, you know, it kind of would go back to what the old model was anyway. So, you know, I think it's interesting to see that. I mean, there's certainly a lot of discussion, and I see a lot of posts too here on LinkedIn about that, and people talking about that kind of thing. But I think it's great to highlight that, and like you said, that, you know, American brands can leverage that as well, which I think is a great thing to point out, because I think a lot of that.
And I mean, end of the day, it's the American consumer paying for it, right? Like, end of the day, either the brand can lower their prices because they're getting efficiency and the US consumer gets that advantage, or they will have to increase their prices, but it's the US brand that's doing that, right? So, you know, we believe right now it's great for US brands, it's great for US consumers. They just need help learning how to leverage it, and that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good thing to point out. It's great that you guys are helping those brands too to be able to leverage and navigate that as well. I'm curious, Izzy, like as you see brands that are approaching you or thinking about this, I mean, what are some of the, I guess, advice or consulting you do with them to, you know, make sure that they're ready to leverage something like a portless model?
Absolutely. So a few things. First, we take our part of our business relationship with our customers extremely seriously, because we consider ourselves the most important partner that brands have. You make a great product. If you can't deliver that efficiently, no one's gonna be very happy with you. So we take that very seriously. So we're very happy for brands, crawl, walk, run. You want to test us out. First of all, like we send test samples of portless notebooks. You know, our customers get it 5 days later. Then they might send us a few SKUs, like, oh, wow, let's test these few SKUs. They test it. They see we're delivering, you know, USPS number within 24 hours, delivered within 5 days, 5.2 days. And then we just grow from there. So we understand, we consider ourselves, we take our jobs very seriously. We consider ourselves your most important partner. We have a white glove experience. Everyone speaks English. We have account managers. We'll help you with the tech stack. Tech stack integration is a 30-minute Shopify app download. It really is nothing. And we just make sure that every single part of that transition is super smooth. Your account managers speak English. We're on Slack. And as long as a brand will trust us with testing this model, we take that very seriously and making sure that transition is seamless from testing one SKU to 10,000 SKUs to 100,000 SKUs. We'll make sure that transition is perfect because our what we do represents the brands that we service.
Interesting. Yeah. And you mentioned from 10 SKUs to 10,000 SKUs. I'm curious because you guys have the location in China, right? I mean, what kind of capacity do you have over there? Are you growing? And what does that look like?
Yeah, we have hundreds of thousands of square feet of capacity and growing.
Oh, wow.
We have both bonded facilities and non-bonded facilities, depending on the brand and how they want to leverage it. So yeah, like we're very fortunate to have the ability to get great, affordable space and be able to deliver services for large scale customers and mid scale customers.
Interesting. And do you see too, I mean, as you're engaging with potential clients or, existing e-commerce brands and engaging in that community, I mean, is this something that a lot of brands are not really aware of right now? Is this kind of like a light bulb moment when you talk to them?
Absolutely. So what I say is this model has been around for 10 years, a little over 10 years, but it only got really good the last 3 years. So it went from historically a 3-week delivery to now 5.2 days with 100% local USPS experience. Those two things is the game-changing moment here. So when you could deliver in 5.2 days, which is faster than some US logistics SLAs, and with the local experience, now really any DTC brand can leverage our model. Because historically, when the model took closer to 2 to 3 weeks, and they'd be managing the tracking number, which was the way the model started, no US brand would want to leverage that. But now that we have up to 8 injection points across the US, meaning we're passing these USPS packages right near your customer. So your customer is in the Northwest Coast, it's LA, if it's Miami, Chicago, New York, Arizona, Texas, Atlanta, wherever your customer is, that is where we're injecting it to USPS near your customer. So that is and this only happened over the last 2 to 3 years. So now that those two facts exist, fast delivery and local experiences, there isn't a US brand that can't use us. The only one that can't use us is literally Amazon FBA. So if you want to sell on Amazon FBA, you got to send it to Amazon. They need same day or next day delivery. But 99% of brands that are selling on the Shopify or it's Target Marketplace, Walmart Marketplace, we deliver all within those SLAs of very normal DTC shipping times.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think it's great. And being able to do that and leverage those different things and make that happen for brands and then give the consumer a good experience too at the end of the day is a great thing. So my other question to you is, as we look at the 3PL landscape overall, I'm curious your thoughts on what do you think the kind of the future of the 3PL landscape looks like, because you guys are approaching it with somewhat of a different model, you could say, right? So I'm curious, what do you think that looks like? What do you think you'll see more people trying to do what Portless is doing, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first I go on a macro level. Like, what do brands think about today? If you went back 3 years ago, brands were like, how do I deliver a product next day? And to do that, there's a lot of cost, a lot of inventory disbursement. You need 12 facilities to have all your facilities to have product. So that was, I think, Deliver or a lot of the 3PLs that we're building towards, like 50 distribution hubs, so you can have a next day delivery. Brands, to me, from my perspective, are now looking for profits and cash flow. So we went the other direction. We're saying, if you need something delivered tomorrow, Amazon exists. You need diapers, get it from Amazon. But for brands in the fashion space, cosmetics, jewelry, kind of lifestyle brands, 5 days is a great delivery time. And brands, the two things they care about the most right now is profits and cash flow. And that's where we come in. And for us, we're not doing this only in China. We're in Vietnam. We'll be in India. We'll be in every major manufacturing hub. Oh, wow. So definitely from the 3PL side, most of the business is focused on the US market. And that makes sense. That is most of the, let's call it the prize. But we see as this space as a very, very 10x more difficult to do business in these markets. There's 100 different carrier lines that we have to leverage depending on the raw materials. And we just happen to be experts in this because we've been doing this for 10 years. So we do think this is the next upcoming stage for the DTC brands, where the historical was burn money for fast day delivery, compete against Amazon. Yeah. Our perspective is, if you want to compete, you got to play a different game. If you're going to play the same game, you're racing to the bottom. But if you play supply chain, an entirely different game, your consumer has the great product and you can run a great cash flow margin business.
Interesting. Yeah. I think it's interesting too that you mentioned there you guys are expanding into India and Vietnam as well. And I think that's pretty interesting. And you mentioned there, kind of the U.S. being, one of the big markets here for e-commerce. And as you guys are shipping globally and internationally to multiple different countries, I'm curious, where do you see some growth happening within e-commerce demand from a consumer perspective? Is there any country that's really kind of taking off or is getting, more on the level of the U.S. in terms of e-commerce demand?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the biggest, another huge big aha moment for brands. From our perspective, the world is getting smaller and smaller year over year. Like our average time is 5.2 days. The projections is meant to be 3, right? Which means delivery times are only going to get better and better. And when a European brand realizes they could open into the US market, or a US brand realizes they could open into the European market, that changes how they look at marketing. It changes their CAC, the customer acquisition costs. And all of a sudden, it's no longer I'm limited to my local market for revenue. You could open up to 50 countries. And Europe is a very mature e-commerce market. We sell all over Asia. That market is getting more and more mature. So you'll always have a fine balance of cheaper marketing costs, but also lower conversion rates. But we're seeing sales across the board. So if you want to truly expand your business while keeping your CAC low, the world is very small. We could ship to most countries really quickly and really making that simple to expand.
Interesting. And I got a question coming here through message. They want to know, how can fulfillment providers or final mile providers, etc., leverage you guys or integrate with you guys or partner with you?
Yeah, absolutely. We've already had a few large 3PLs reach out to us. We take white label solutions. So if a 3PL wants to introduce this to their customer base, either we could be invisible, we could be the back engine of this model for the brand, for the 3PL brand, or we could be a partner. So we're pursuing both right now. We're very open to bringing partnerships.
Interesting. Okay. And I'm curious too, on the final mile aspect, I think you mentioned you guys leverage USPS as the final mile.
So we leverage a lot of regional carriers as well.
Okay.
So we have for us, it's understanding where we do a lot of sorting, right? So when we get an order to the US, we could sort up to 8 different injection points. And then depending on the zip code, we look at who is the best carrier for that model. So customers could choose, I only want USPS, not a problem. But there's actually OnTrack and LSO, Lone Star Overnight, and Uni. There's great last mile carriers that we currently partner with and we work with, depending on the zip code of where the customer lives.
Interesting. And I'm curious too, your thoughts on because there's a lot of those last mile regional carriers that you mentioned there as well, and there's certainly some discussion in the market about how will that look in the long term. Will there be some consolidation? What are your thoughts on
I think what these guys are doing?
Yeah,
I think what these guys are doing are brilliant. What they're doing is they're looking at high density areas and they're building strong networks for last mile delivery in those areas. So for them, they basically have a better gross margin business because they could deliver more packages in less time. So the cost per package goes down. And who benefits it? The consumer, right? Because you have our brands will leverage these last mile carriers where they're strong. And where they're not strong, USPS delivers it, right? Because USPS delivers to almost every address. But these local regional carriers that get really strong in high density areas, it is great. It's great for the market, right? So they have very fast delivery times. They're faster than the USPS. And they're cheaper. So it's kind of like a win-win. So they create these strong networks in high density areas, and it's been incredible to watch, and we're just thankful to partner with them.
Interesting. And I guess on that regard too, you talk about doing fast delivery there, and obviously there's been tons of discussion, especially since the pandemic, around what is a acceptable delivery time, and you guys on average are doing 5.2 days, as you said.
Yeah.
Are you still seeing, not just necessarily from Portless, but just in the market in general, as you talk to people? Is there still a high demand for fast delivery, or is that kind of cooled off a little bit?
We've definitely seen that cooled off. And for some brands that do want to provide it, they end up turning into a revenue driver. So they'll do their normal, standard shipping will be through us, and they'll bring in a small portion of their inventory locally for next day delivery and charge a lot for it. So the consumers that want a next day and willing to pay for it, they turn that to like an increased revenue driver. Like, sure, we'll charge, $10 or $15, $14.99, whatever it is. But the amount of inventory, we've almost always seen that under 10%. I think the highest we've seen when you look at the data of who chooses priority, like fast delivery versus standard, it's like the highest we've seen is 9%. Usually it's like under 5%. But it could be a revenue driver. You could charge more for it. So you bring that locally, you have some inventory locally, but your like standard free shipping or standard $4.99 shipping is usually through our model.
Interesting. Yeah. It's interesting to see because there certainly was so much focus on these startups that were doing 15-minute delivery and crazy things like that. And yeah. I think it's interesting to see how that's kind of cooled off a little bit as people maybe are not at home.
Well, there's space in the market for that too, right? Like think of GoPuff, they're delivering ice cream in the moment. So there's a space for it. Obviously, it costs money. You're paying for it, but there is a space in the market for like the convenience store to your doorstep. That makes a lot of sense, and you're going to pay a premium for that service. Amazon, you're paying for the brand's inventory risk. You're paying for the brand's needing to put that on a boat and wait 60 days. So whatever service you get, you're essentially paying for it, but it's fine. Like there are some items you need that, and to me, there's a market for I think a big enough market for all these different areas.
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious from the warehouse perspective. You mentioned you have the facility there, hundreds of thousands of square feet. I mean, what does your facility kind of look like? Do you guys have any kind of cool automation or robotic stuff going on in there?
Yeah, we use conveyor belts, sorting machines, and robotics. We keep building it out. We keep adding more layers of tech and software to it. But yeah, for us, it's like, how do you just constantly drive efficiency, mainly for speed, right? Like, how do we get it out? We're 99.9% out the same day we get the order. And we want to keep that, right? Because getting it out as very fast drives the delivery times. I'll give you a great example. When I went to Shop Talk, I spoke at Shop Talk, I got a gift package. It was shipped from Miami I live in Toronto, to Toronto. It took 15 days. Of the 15 days, 6 days was simply getting it to the local USPS. So whoever was running that, and I'm not here to bash them, it was just like pretty slow in injecting it. So that's 6 days loss. And then once it got there, it still took 9 days to get to me. For us in Shenzhen, we get out within 24 hours. We deliver to Canada within 7 days. So, and Canada is slower than the US, right? US is 5.2, Europe is 4.4. So it really, it's all about your efficiency. Like, I don't care if you're down the block. If you're not efficient, you're not going to deliver fast. So we just drive, where is technology going to allow us to get stuff at the door faster and faster?
Yeah. I think that's a great point too there. I mean, because it's one thing to have that final mile and have the transportation part be fast and efficient, but if you're not getting it out the door like fast and efficient, then that slows down the whole process, right? So it's a very interesting example there, and maybe a potential client for you guys. Maybe
yeah, I wasn't going to drive them too nuts about it, but as a supply chain nerd, Kevin, that we are, I couldn't but dive into the supply side of that gift package.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had some experiences like that for sure, and I've just been like, what's taking so long? Like, it's probably, I know you guys could do this better. So very interesting stuff with you here, Izzy. But as we look at starting to wrap up here, Izzy, what would be some of like your top advice for brands that are looking to improve their supply chain and maybe go this route or just get more sophisticated in general, since you've lived through this before?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the common theme you're seeing, at Shop Talk or really at all the conferences now. Brands are looking for efficiency to drive margin and cash flow, profitability and cash flow. And it doesn't only exist in supply chain. There's tons of AI software that help you be more optimized. But in our end, what we see, at least unique for us, and like what I said before, if you want to compete against the monsters, you got to play a different game. And for our model, we're not here to optimize your business by single digits. We're here to change the way you play the game, to change the way you're running your business. And by using this model, going from months of cash flow cycles to days is game changing. So if you're a brand, or if you're a brand looking to test it, we take our partnership with any brand extremely seriously. You feel free to reach out. We have a white glove experience. We'll onboard you. We will test us out, proof is in the pudding. You like it with one SKU, you keep expanding. And we think we're in a scenario where everybody wins. The brand wins, the consumer wins, and companies are running healthier businesses, which is the focus for every DTC company today, an e-commerce company.
Absolutely. All right. Great advice there. And really appreciate you joining me here today, Izzy, for this discussion. Very interesting what you guys are doing and very smart too, I think, to leverage the supply chain in the way you are. And I think is a great thing because supply chain, I think, is all about getting creative and making it optimize and work best for you, as you mentioned in this conversation. So if people are listening and they're interested in learning more about Portless, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, first of all, Kevin, thank you so much for having me. I love talking supply chain, as we both enjoy it very much.
Oh, yeah.
Feel free to send me a DM, a direct message on LinkedIn or Twitter. You can visit our website, portless.com. We've got case studies. You have a little more information on the model, and you could book with our team directly on the website with our sales team, or reach out on a DM. We'll get something set up.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Izzy, for your time today and coming on here to talk with me. Connect with Izzy here on LinkedIn. Reach out to him, pick his brain if you would like, on how to leverage Portless and check them out. So, Izzy, thank you so much once again for your time today. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the new warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for The New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.